Thank you very much. I'll start off with this Brother Warner's business. I'm the great-grandfather and he's a nephew, but a darn good one. I want to be remembered as being the shorter of the speakers, but I also want to talk slowly. I mean, you listen to Tom Davis and Chichester. I'm trying to take a few notes, gents. I couldn't get it all down. All that wisdom rolled out so fast. But I want to say 2 words. That's the theme of my speech, and that's thank you. I want to thank you for what you're doing for this great Commonwealth of Virginia, which we all love so dearly in our hearts, and which has been a part of my life since I was born. I want to also thank you for the privilege, and it is a privilege, ladies and gentlemen, no matter whether you're on a town council or in the United States Senate, it's a privilege to have had the courage and experienced the daunting experience of asking someone for the vote to gain public office. There's no greater. And I was privileged to do that, and I reckon there's a few of you in here might have voted for me. So I want to say thank you. Didn't see every hand move, so to the Democrats, I wish you well. We also have the Virginian of the Year, John Hager. I've known John since day one, his lovely wife, and John exemplifies, really, I may say, and it has something to do it in Northern Virginia, the old Virginia that I knew. The Virginia that my father experienced when in 1903 he graduated from Washington Lee and later became a practicing physician in this community. That's the Virginia that I've known, and John exemplifies that. So I say to those who engineered his election, you picked the right man, John. Well done. Now, I'm to talk about the Senate that you sent me to, and like Tom Davis, I love that line, unindicted. Yes, John, I meant same with you, Tom. But that's a tradition of Virginia. You look back on the history of the political system, be it Democrat, Republican, or Independent, and all Congress, when I was there, really used to say, you know, we envy your state. It has clean, heartfelt politics, and that it did. Rare is the occasion when a public office holder had to be accountable in a court of law in our state. Cross the border to Maryland, for example. I won't go any further than that, like traveling through the District of Columbia. But that's serious. It's a reflection on the people that we were privileged in our public office to represent. And I do hope, as you spoke to 2 gentlemen about this super PAC business, beware the day the super PAC business begins to destroy the incentive of the worker bees, the volunteers, the persons who give you $25, maybe $50, the persons who will get out and walk the block, the precinct for you, the persons that will work for the political system that they believe in. And to think that all of that work could be rubbed out in a half a second on television. That's my concern about that future. I'm living in it. But in the course of the wonderful time I had in the Senate, and I really loved it. And we had a little fun. I'll talk about the fun that we had, because everybody needs a little fun in life. But I was in a four-way race with Tim Kaine's father-in-law, Linwood Houghton, who had been my roommate in Washington and Lee, fraternity brother, and a wonderful delegate from the Valley of Virginia, and Richard Obenchain. And the four of us traveled all over this state for 1 year, standing on soapboxes, debating like old-fashioned debates. And we never once, I think, said a harsh or mean word about the others. It was just old-time politics at its best. And I so despair today when I look at the divisions in our country and the decisions in politics being driven by disappointment and fear and anguish. They were not present when I was privileged to first run. We talked about the greatness of our Commonwealth. We talked about, yes, jobs, and there were organizations like this all over the state at that time that were devoted to it. And so I still have not lost an ounce of faith in Virginia standing up for what it believes in, maintaining the culture of integrity that our forefathers and fathers had, and carrying on in the future, and that is your job, and that is why I thank you. That's an applause line. Loosen up. I also look back on working with not one, not two, but 10 governors and innumerable members of Congress and state legislators. Old Lacey Putney and I were honored by the state legislature this year, he being the longest serving member of the General Assembly. Now mind you, Lacey and I were fraternity brothers at Washington Lee in 1946. We slept on the third floor and the rich guys had the second and third floor, I remember that. And here these two old poor boys on the GI Bill, and I'm the second longest serving senator. Only in Virginia, I believe that you could find that same story today. But 10 governors. So I'll start with the first one because he laid down the rules. And I hadn't been in the Senate more than about 3 or 4 weeks. Now, Mills Godwin had not supported me in the primary. That's all right. He said, Warner is not conservative enough. He is just not conservative. Well, he carried the day in that convention of 10,000 delegates in the Coliseum, Richmond, on the 5th ballot, elected Ripon Obenchain, a wonderful man, and he was truly, I think, the father of what conservatism I like to believe in and adhered to in Virginia. And I lost out on the 5th ballot by a very narrow margin. We all went to bed after midnight. I got up the next morning, went to Obenchain's breakfast, handed him a check for a couple of grand, and worked for him. That's the way we did things in that state. We would fight together in these elections, but when it was over, we worked together for the betterment of the Commonwealth and for the betterment of our country. But back to Mills. So Mills, when I got the nomination, he pitched in, but he called me up and said, I want you to come down to the mansion and have lunch with me. I said, all right, Governor, I'll do that. So I remember it was a day in early February, and there was a terrible snowstorm. I had a dickens of a time getting down there. It was the funniest experience. I was married to a fairly colorful lady at that time. And I remember we got to the airport, and the airport was shut down because of snow and ice. And they said, well, there's buses out there. And she said, what, buses? And I said, yeah. And she turned to me with a straight face and said, you know, I've never been on a bus. So we took a bus ride to Richmond. And when we arrived at the governor's mansion, there was the governor and the first lady out on the little stoop to greet us. And my wife and I got out, and my wife just ran right by both of them. And I didn't know what the hell was the problem. I learned that she wanted to go to the bathroom, and that was an overriding moment. So the two ladies then went to sort of care for each other, and the governor said, stand here a minute, Senator. Stand right on these steps. And I want you to know all roads in Virginia, no matter where the origin of that road is, lead to Richmond. Do you understand that? Well, I'm sitting there somewhat perplexed, nodding my head dutifully. And when they come to Richmond, they stop at these steps right here between this house and the General Assembly. That's what governs this state. That's what you will vote for when you get to Washington. Do you understand that, Senator? And we went and had a pleasant lunch, and I went back to Washington. But I did campaign for my party in the course of 10 gubernatorial elections, but then the next day, I went to work for that governor. I even had a little dust up with this one over here. But once he got elected, we went to work together. And that's the way it was yesteryear. And I still believe it's inherent in this state that we continue to do it. Now, the Senate I was in, it was run very firmly by a group of about 6 senior senators on the Republican side and 6 on the Democrat side. They were the respective leader and minority leader, whips, so forth, but they were the old party chairman. You got to be chairman of your committee virtually based on seniority. And I had a lucky stroke. As a matter of fact, I had luck from the first day I got into politics. Why, I don't know. I had more than any other politician, I believe, and I'm deeply humbled by that good fortune. But in the 30 years I was there in the Senate, half the time I was in the leadership of the Armed Services Committee, either as a ranking member or 3 times the chairman of that powerful committee. And through the powerful chairmanships operated the Senate. Now you could vote, of course, your conscience, some of the time, but by and large, they dominated it. You had discipline, you knew how you worked up in the system, and you had responsibility, and you had accountability. When I walked into the markups to mark up those bills, if a senator on my committee, Armed Services, wasn't able to be there or only there for part of the time as we're drawing that bill up, I had his or her proxy in my pocket. And either the chairman or myself as ranking, we each knew that. And those votes were cast in those committees and those decisions were made. And when you went to the floor, that's when the rubber met the road. But you knew your committee was there, you could call on your committee, they would come down, they would argue that portion of the bill that was strong to them, and they crossed that aisle and made sure I said, don't worry about the votes here, you go over there and get the votes and bring them back to me. That's the way we ran that Senate. It's not that way now. We'll hear about it in a moment. The other thing that I remember so well is we had fun. We traveled together, and the wives had a very strong influence on us in those days. When we had filibusters, the wives, or late night sessions, I'll start about late night sessions, the wives would join in the dining room and you'd run up to vote and come back down. But we may have gone up and argued against each other, canceled each other's vote out, came back down and sat with the wives. They made us forget that politics and we enjoyed ourselves. We got on airplanes and visited much of the world, carrying our wives with us. And they kept discipline on that plane, and we just had a good time. We knew each other. We trusted each other. And that Senate functioned and passed tremendous pieces of legislation. Then you argue about pork. Well, you know, I always liked soy ham and a few things like that. But pork in the Senate was done with frequency. The chairman had a lot to do about it. Chairman on the committee would quietly talk to his members and, if possible, accommodate them. And I was accommodated quite a number of times. And I'll just point out some of the things that I was fortunate to get. 3 of them, I just put them in mind. The first was the opportunity. I had been chairman of the subcommittee on the Highway Committee in the Senate. And lo and behold, we had one of the annual 6-year highway bills up. Well, living in this area of Alexandria and so forth, I was thoroughly familiar with all of the problems of transportation around here, and particularly the decrepit and really dangerous condition of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and we've finished the floor action, and the chairman was a House member. He and the chairman of the Senate and the 2 subcommittees, just 4 senators, were sitting up in the chairman of the House little office going over the final measures and fine-tuning them. And then the chairman turned to us as a custom was, all right, which project do you want? Which project do you want? And I was a junior guy. And I said, the last project, I want a bridge. And chairman never flinched an eye. And he said, what do you think you'll need for it to get started? I said, $900 million. He never flinched an eye. We took that bill to the floor. Frank Wolf was in the Senate. Frank, Moran, all of us pitched together in Virginia and got that provision through, and the result was this magnificent bridge which we desperately needed since the other one was on its last legs. That's pork? Fine, so be it. It serves the community, it serves us all well. There was a technical thing in there by which I got it. I went back and researched Eisenhower when he was a young major working for, he was given the job to go out and determine how the military would move around America from coast to coast, and he drew up a map which eventually became the federal highway system, and that bridge was key to moving the troops gathered in Virginia to the ports in Maryland and elsewhere to get them overseas. So I said it was a military bridge. It was needed for the troops. And doggone if it didn't sell. Right, Frank? The other was, I love the outdoors. I used to still do a little bit, but fishing and hiking all through this state. Campaigned a good bit. Did a lot to create national forests. But I used to go down in the bucket parade on the Rappahannock River. And the bucket parade, we'd go down, we have buckets, and the old dam that had been there 80 years was blocking the natural migration of the shad and the herring and the perch all the way up the river for 80 years. But still Mother Nature would gather these fish, and they would perish banging themselves against this piece of concrete. And we'd go down and bucket them up with a net first, then in a bucket, carry the buckets up, and dump them above the dam. Well, I got tired of carrying the damn buckets. So I said, we're going to blow this bridge up. Well, the reason I had a little power was, again, the Armed Services Committee controls the promotions of the Corps of Engineers. Got it? Well, the Corps did the job. It took us, I think, 10 years. Again, state delegates in here, many of them, all worked together with me, and we blew up the Embry Dam, and now the Rappahannock, those fish migrate from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. That's pork. Now lastly, I was hoping Tom Davis would deal with this, because I see my good friend Governor Kane here. We work together very closely with Tom and all the delegation to put in Dulles Rail. And as I travel along today and everybody's griping about all the construction confusion, I say, oh yeah, we'll call up Tom Davis or Frank Wolf. I don't have anything to do with it anymore. So that was a piece of pork. Well, I think my time is about run out. I was going to tell one last story, but I think I'll hold it for the moment, because our next speaker indeed is an impressive United States Senator. Well, I was going to tell you this story. In life, you go back and you figure out how you got from where you started to where you are. And in World War II, I served in the last year of 1945 in the United States Navy, and I was always grateful to the Navy for what it had done for me. And I got the GI Bill. My father died when I was a freshman at Washington Lee, and that GI Bill got me through Washington Lee University. And I never forgot it. And then, for reasons I'm not clearly sure why, I joined the Marines. But it was a great experience, and I got trotted off to Korea when I was in the University of Virginia Law School. But again, I got another GI Bill for a tour in Korea. So that finished the law school for me. So all through my 30 years in the Senate, I worked on upgrading the GI Bill and got to the point where this thing was just not supporting the ability of a young man to get to some major schools, or a young woman, as the case may be. And furthermore, sometimes the service person doesn't want the benefits. They want to pass it to his wife, but that's not possible, or even to a child. I say, you earned it, it's yours, if you're not going to use it. So anyway, I tried to work on that. I was even chairman of the committee. I could not get it through the Secretary of Defense. I couldn't get it to the President, too expensive OMB. So there was a change of administrations, and lo and behold, Jim Webb shows up. Jim Webb, as a young captain, was an aide to me when I was Secretary of the Navy. I said, Jim, let's get to work on the GI Bill. And we got Chuck Hagel and Frank Lautenberg. We called ourselves the Four Horsemen, and we got that bill passed. So the modern GI Bill today, which provides for a member who earned it to give it to his wife or spouse, is probably one of the proudest moments of my life when that bill passed. But I want to turn to today's Senate. Now, mind you, when I left the Senate in January of 2009, I had been there 30 years and had 10 years before that in other government positions. So I returned to the private sector. But I tell you, there was an ethics law, and I couldn't go back to Congress for 2 years. So I never set foot in the halls of Congress for 2 years, but I watched and studied and learned, and I saw this fine senator who's now going to take the rostrum show measure of courage, every bit of the measure of courage that I and Frank and others and Tom have shared with our delegations throughout the years, and he is the man of the hour. So I've told you of the Senate of yesterday, and I now yield the floor, as we say, to my colleague to talk about the Senate today. Thank you. Hand it up again. Yeah.